all I know is he's a smart guy. He's well organized, and he's India more than most. Although he's got offices elsewhere. So I'm just going to let him take it away. Brian is the founder of a company called Links.io, and I'll let you just give a little bit of background, Brian, and yourself, Brian Chappelle.
For sure.
And we're just he's one of the guys that I appreciate around me. He's another smart guy. So. Without further ado, just a little bit of background before you jump in. Thanks.
For sure. Thanks for the introduction. Like Ernest was saying, I'm Brian Chappell with Link Software. You can check us out at Links.io. With the Harbor Accelerator, we were one of the first teams, or we were in the first cohort. So we started out as a product, a mobile application, and then we iterated to be a services offering. Tom Wilson with Jack Russell Software is my co-founder. He's pretty influential in every single thing that I say. Sometimes people are like, yeah, I think I heard Tom say that once. I'm like, yeah, about right. So we just brought on a new CEO, and we've just been pushing hard on our services offering, building apps, mobile apps, web apps, even doing some website work. So the talk, as Ernest queued it up, is about software is about people. And I really think that software is people in general, right? It is essentially the byproduct of an idea that folks iterate on. You work in a team, you get some people to rally around that idea, and you try to make it better. As that idea grows, once you get that idea to a product stage and you put it out into the world, then you get into a scenario where you now are sharing ideas with your customers and your clients. You're getting all that feedback, and it can be difficult to get an idea off the ground and get all the stakeholders to buy in, but then it becomes exponentially more difficult when you have customers. I've heard a few times people say that building software would be a lot of fun if there weren't any users. And so that's pretty accurate because they can guide your product into a place that you don't necessarily want it to go. First slide here is I love my manager. I have personally never heard anyone say this, but I'm sure somebody had too much coffee and said it one day. So the quote is more about an idea of at Links. So I'm a project manager at Links, and I don't manage people, I manage projects. And with people and ideas and software kind of being blurred most of the time, it can be difficult to bifurcate or differentiate between the two. I also, from probably like a philosophical level, disagree with the idea of a manager and think that it may be something that we don't need at large. If you look at nature, it's not something that you can find in any other species. And there's some research that's been done on maybe where the concept of a manager came from, a lot of which is from the Industrial Revolution, where you had folks doing mundane tasks, working on an assembly line. And let's say, for example, you're a metal stamper, and there's no way for me as a CEO of the car company to give you upward mobility in your position. But one idea that came to fruition is I'll make you the manager of all the other metal stampers. And then we start to get into these arbitrary checklists, and you're going around keeping tabs on all your coworkers, and there's a whole litany of issues that can result from managers. So at Links, we stay super flat. Team Treehouse has done a lot of work on this idea of a flat company, a manager-less company. Nobody is a manager, but everybody manages themselves. And there's a process and a system of checks and balances around everybody's work that encourages them to stay on task and be productive. Steve Jobs has a quote here he was doing an interview, and the reporter said, what are some of the key factors to success at Apple? And before he talked about who we hire or the technology we use, his first line was, Apple is an incredibly collaborative company. And I think that this kind of dovetails into the system we use, or the systems we pick, the processes we pick, the tools we pick. The more that we can encourage collaboration and remove this idea of I report to you, who reports to you, reports to you, and instead make it make your organization as best you can into a place where everybody can bounce ideas off of each other and move stuff forward. Yeah. So I'm giving all of this background about people so that we put a foundation in place, knowing that no matter what tool or process you pick, if you're not appreciative of these factors, to me, it may be a little bit of a fool's errand. And there's 3 factors, in my view, that motivate people. And obviously it's not my view, I stole it from somewhere, I'm sure. So we have contribution, compensation, and control. And we think of those 3 as levers. Contribution, just that I'm contributing to something that's bigger than myself. Compensation, I can pay my rent. And control is that I don't have 20 managers telling me what to do, and I have some control over the tasks that I pick and the speed at which I complete it. An example here, maybe not in software, might be somebody who works for a nonprofit that focuses on homelessness. So maybe they don't make a lot on the compensation side, but the contribution they're making to society as a whole is far more fulfilling, and that way the contribution lever is all the way up and the compensation level doesn't necessarily have to be as high to keep that person motivated. Another example, like from before, let's say it's a car manufacturing plant. Henry Ford is well known for paying his worker $5.50, double the rate at the time. His workers $5.50, double the rate at the time, because he kept just burning all these funds on training and retraining and training and retraining. So what he did was, maybe their contribution was somewhat there, the car was a new idea, their control was bare minimum. They're in an assembly line doing the same task over and over and over, and it's very machine-like. And so the way that he kept his people motivated was he turned the compensation as high as it would go, especially for the time. Those are just a few points that kind of guide all of the choices we make at Lynx to do with our process and our tools. So I'm gonna jump from that into a Trello board. I'm using Trello here as an example because it's the simplest form of Kanban. Well, before I go into that, let me just move. We got motivation out of the way. Let me just ask a few questions so I can kind of gauge where you guys are. How many of you guys in the room work for software companies that build apps? Just show of hands. And then, how many of you work for software companies that build multiple apps at the same time, like a dev shop? And then, familiarity with Scrum? Everybody probably knows Scrum. You guys are so excited. In the same way that most of you are familiar with Scrum, Kanban is a project methodology, meaning signboard or billboard in Japanese, but it's the leanest approach that I have found. If we look at Scrum and look at all the complexity around having a Scrum Master and estimating points and sticking to a very rigid system, retrospectives are probably the biggest example here, but sticking to a very rigid system. When you start using Kanban, which can be as simple as just putting your tasks on a board, It can be as simple as using a whiteboard and sticky notes. It doesn't have to be necessarily a software product, but it's useful to have something like Trello so that everybody can see the same board. Taking the processes down to a minimum level, or as low as we can get them, is our goal. And we use, or we have a lot of developers, for instance, from the Iron Yard, where maybe they don't have a formal education in project management or software development. And so this is just a great way for everybody to jump in immediately and start jamming on a project. Agile meets Kanban maybe is the right definition, but in the same way I don't like managers, I don't like structure, I don't like the idea of locking us into a very rigid system. Borrowing from Scrum though, we have 4 lists, Icebox being a list of tasks or issues where you're outlining customer feedback or directives from stakeholders. The backlog being a list of features that you've decided to include in the product, in the app. Current being the list of everything that's being worked on. And then lastly, done, meaning that it's gone to production and it's live, customers are using it. One thing that can be, well, once you get out into production, a lot of times folks add a review stage where they have a very specific pipeline that has production criteria and quality assurance or approval criteria. The biggest thing for our success is that we have an overly robust, and I'll blame Tom Wilson again for this, README on every single project. It's probably the biggest catalyst to our success on a lot of projects. This is just a basic blank document, but if we were borrowing more from Scrum, or when we are, I should say, we get really deep into the weeds on exactly what greenfield development might mean. We might outline 2 or 3 sprints. It's unlikely that we'll have 5 sprints mapped out. We have a retrospective in here. Sometimes we don't do that, or I hate doing that, I should say. And then it goes on and on with more traditional README line items. So the idea here is that we can bring somebody who's never seen the application before, doesn't even know what it's called, first to the README and let them download all of this information. This might be 3 or 4 times longer than it is now. Download all of that information, then come back to us and ask questions. A common mistake that I see happen with a lot of folks is that they try to, just in conversation, try to give every possible nuance to a software that's there, or developers oftentimes will just give you this bit right here, right? Just go to the repo, clone it, build it locally, and that's what it is. We all know that there's a million other angles or facets to the system that would be beneficial if you're new to a project to be aware of. And then I see it too a lot of time get burnt on doing a gap analysis. Like, do you understand what I'm saying? Do you not understand what I'm saying? And getting somebody started on a project. Where we're small, so we might only have 2 or 3 people available, and we need to bring on 3 more people. And so it's important, at least to us, that we're able to scale quickly. And our documentation is probably one of our biggest things. So for each one of these lists, we fill them up with issues. And again, thinking of it in the simplest way possible. A client or a customer is going to give us the what and the why. So it's not our responsibility as developers to tell project owners what we think they should build. This is something that happens commonly as well, I think, because engineers are creative people by nature and will over-engineer everything, literally everything. And so if we can just let the customer tell us what they want to build, it is our theory that you will build better software. In the same way that if you're conscious of what motivates people, you will build better software, equally is valuable. And it can be a paradigm shift for a lot of developers because they go into these conversations on maybe with some preset notions of what should be built. And it's better in the long run, I think, to let people fail or succeed on their own as product owners or clients. Maybe give them some input, and that input can come from the how and the when. So a client may, for example, say that they want to include a Google Plus login to their sign up because 50% of the users are using Google Plus and nobody likes to remember another set of email and password credentials. Then a set of engineers would come to the table and say that we can do that, we'll abstract that as a login, use a third-party service like Auth0, and the when would be 2 weeks. Separating those responsibilities is just a key in my mind to getting things defined and getting them into the backlog. Maybe one point about the backlog or the list. If you're familiar with or if you're familiar with Scrum, you probably are aware of this. But developers, and I guess to another point is, doesn't necessarily just have to be developers, right? Content managers, designers, all can subscribe to this same methodology. But developers are not allowed to pull from Icebox. Only allowed to pull from backlog. And so as a developer, I'm not even looking at Icebox because I really don't care that much. I'm focused primarily on the backlog. So the user story for every issue is another important part, and we use something called the cucumber method. I know I've said it 100 times now, but as simple as possible. As I want to, so that. Very common way of assembling a user story. And so we can take the what and the why, and the how and the when, and assemble it into these 3 sentences. So if we use the Google Plus example again, as a user, I want to log in with Google Plus so that I don't have to remember another set of passwords. And that is more or less enough for me or for a developer to digest it quickly and prescribe a solution. The other big piece, maybe I have it in another place. The other big piece to issue creation, in my view at least, just because I like things to be more graphical, would be screenshots before and after. Even if it's something as simple as this, and just giving me a screenshot of the current login and then what you expect it to look like, I probably don't have to read the user story if you show me email, password, login, and a login with Google Plus. I don't even have to think much about it. And so we're trying to reduce the amount of processing that everybody in the team has to do and allow them to get their work done as quickly as possible. I guess I should be moving this into current first. Anyways, stand-ups. We use stand-ups. We push back against it and go back and forth. There are ways to do stand-ups programmatically. If you use Slack, anybody familiar with Slack? So if you use Slack on a daily basis, there are bots that you could use that could do all your stand-up work for you. The goal is to go around the room, or the idea is to go around the room and ask 3 questions. What are you working on? Or what did you work on yesterday? What are you working on today? And is there anything standing in your way? Back to Steve Jobs' quote and why Apple, even today, is structured more like a startup than IBM, is to encourage collaboration. So we get everybody on the same page and allow everybody to offer help, ask for help, and then prioritize all of our issues. The benefit of having the stand-ups is that almost every single sprint or every single iteration on a product is going to have new information dropped in mid-build. It's almost a guarantee. And this is a way to swarm on that information and prioritize it into the list of things that you're planning on building. We try to keep the stand-ups down to 15 minutes. I know there's a number of teams that use stand-ups for more social activities, but it seems to be better for us when we keep it really quick and have a lot of our team has the 3 things they want to say outlined before the stand-up even starts. And we want people to, back to the motivation stuff and the lines being blurred between software and people, we don't want people to just accidentally wake up every day and bumble into work and do their job. We want them to be consciously thinking of what is your purpose, what are you contributing to, how does your actions, how does your workload affect the team as a whole. And stand-ups is just a way to, especially as a project manager, to kind of gauge the team and feel like, are we getting burnout? Does everybody hate this? Is everybody bored? Or is everybody still super excited? Estimating points is another concept borrowed from some of the more formal project methodologies. We have ours set up with FTE equal to 40 points, 1 point easy, 2 to 3 hours, 2 points medium, 1 day, and 4 points hard. So there's a key piece in here where anything over 4 points is flagged as the project manager as something that needs to be broken down into more pieces. I don't want to give anybody on the team a big, huge ball of wax that they need to decipher. And some of my team members will write things like 160 points on it, and essentially what they're saying is, stop being ass, right? They want me to really spend some more time thinking about this, because they're looking at it like, Brian spent 2 seconds looking at this, wrote it up, and threw it into our backlog. If you do want to use Trello, I know a lot of the large organizations use some more robust systems, but there's a Chrome plugin that you could use with Trello if you wanted to stay super cheap and super lean, which I am more than all for. You can estimate points, and it'll add a point to every single card, and then it'll also give you the ability to do burn down charts and whatever other type of metrics that you capture around the Scrum. I'm not. Sprints, real quick, are 2-week increments. We also have this notion of having a high velocity team, and that's just a label that we're applying to all of these ideas around motivation, around collaboration, and around a lack of process. One thing that we do that may be different or maybe a common practice is we ask every developer when they pick the task that they're doing in a 2-week sprint to not think of it as a 2-week sprint at all, but to think about how much work they can do in 4 days. So we're just mitigating our risk of not hitting our deadlines by saying 4 days. And it usually takes a few sprints for a new developer or somebody new to a project to get a sense of what that actually means. It's also, at Lynx, we want to build a safe environment, so nobody, if something goes wrong, we don't blame anybody. The only things that you can be at fault for are not asking for help or not giving help. This is something that was, well, I first heard about this from the CEO of Lego. And that's a real paradigm shift as well when you think about blame. So everybody's already stressed out, everybody has way more things going on than work, but work is a third of your life. So it's vital that it's a pleasurable experience. And once somebody knows that they cannot be blamed for a deadline being missed, or blamed for a feature breaking, or for a bug, or somebody being ticked off, and you simply say, you didn't ask for help, or you didn't give help, that kind of just changes the whole flow. And it's been super valuable for my team. There's another point I want to make on it, but I can't think of it at the moment. And I hope it's coming through that I think a lot less about software than I think. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, actually, one quick question. The asking people to do 4 days is basically so that they'll always underestimate,
Exactly.
or because people tend to overestimate, or?
You nailed it, yeah.
Okay.
So I'm sure that if you've been through a sprint, you may hit it. You may make your sprints on time, a few sprints in a row, but as the application gets more complex, and this probably goes into another talk about easy versus simple, but as an application becomes more complex, it becomes more and more difficult to hit those deadlines. And in the same way, I think that engineers are by nature creative people. They're also, I can't think of the right word, but they also overdo it a lot of times.
Perfectionists.
Right. And so sometimes you just gotta let it go. I think there's a quote from Einstein where he said, if I had 60 hours or 60 minutes to solve a problem, I'd spend 50 minutes thinking about the process I would use to solve that problem, and then 10 minutes actually solving it. And that's just a great example of probably one of the brighter minds that we've had, also falling short and having the same issues with time estimation. And I think too, really I don't like points that much. I think points are a way, just like every other metric, that a CEO or some high level person in a company looks at. Because they're so far from the front lines, they have these point systems and burn down charts and what's our team bandwidth, and some of these metrics are more used to make them feel not so abstracted from the process and make them feel like they know exactly what's going on. In the same way that we don't necessarily know exactly what's going on in our car engine, but we have, a speedometer and a gas gauge. They get in to work every day and they're driving a business. And so they use those metrics that way. And when you go all the way down to the most granular level of estimating points, everybody here knows, probably if you've used it, that it's way more of an art than a science. And back to the blame thing again, if you said 3 points and it took you 4 days, I don't care. But maybe somebody, some stakeholder, some client might care, and so we just try to hedge those bets with things like 4 days.
One of the things that's been on the business development side and selling stuff, I always got to give the customer a price.
Right.
And when you got a sprint on the backside,
Right.
and you're not estimating, how do I give that price?
Right.
Customers may love our team,
Right.
may
Right.
love our people, may love our process,
Right.
but they can't sell it internally if they say it's going to be somewhere in this range,
Right.
because they're negotiating to time and point. So that's an example of why these mundane point systems are important to get customers. And that's kind of that C-level board.
And I get the logic, and so obviously everything I'm saying here is on behalf of the development team.
That's
Yeah,
absolutely.
and it's more of me trying to lobby an idea. So I completely understand and get the concept behind why they exist, but sometimes I feel like if that same group of individuals was asked to do the same thing, their rate of failure is going to be equally as high because it's so happenstance.
Absolutely.
There's so many factors that come into play with, I think it's 2 points and I get halfway through it and it's way more points than I expected. So there's a concept here known as whip limits and swarm. And the idea would be, like for this talk, I'm making it where my whip limit is 1 card in current at a given time. And this is just around the idea so that we don't get stuck mid-sprint and don't have breakdowns. I'm going to say that there's only a certain number of issues or cards that are allowed in the current list. And as soon as somebody gets stuck by having a whip limit, usually you can identify the need to give help or give advice the same day. At worst case scenario, during the stand-up the next day that somebody is stuck. That whip limit is going to prevent you from bringing new cards into the current folder because Jerry's stuck. And so we need to swarm or rally around Jerry to solve his problem, and then we can keep moving forward. This is why I hired a CEO. Because I'm not good at it. So, setting rules. There are no rules. There are rules, but what I am broadcasting here is not the set of rules that you should maybe go with. It's important that you take this and whatever amalgamation, or don't take it, whatever amalgamation you want to, whatever version you want to use, or whatever parts of it you want to use, and set up a system that fits your team. That's completely custom. One of the things I've always scratched my head about with Scrum is it is a process, and the same with Waterfall and really every project methodology that's very rigid, it is a process that is meant for every single team of multiple disciplines. And it, to me, seems unlikely that that is realistic. But when setting rules, one example of the rules might be how you do your points, the fact that you set up whip limits, the fact that you have 4 boards, or let's say, a review list as well. These concepts should, in my opinion, be specific to your organization, not specific to a particular process or methodology. And so to take your point again with estimating points, I keep going back to it, I know, but the guy who runs the Xbox team at Microsoft, he actually runs multiple teams, but he's over the Xbox offering. He has written a good bit about Kanban and Agile, and his team is much smaller than some of the other folks, maybe the folks that work on, I don't know, the Windows start button or whatever. His team is much smaller, but he continually is able to push out more software and better software. So he consistently gets high marks on his reviews, and he contributes all of his success over many, many years. I think he spent 8 years, I read, actually doing Scrum, but all of his success lately, he contributes to this system. It allows him to move faster and be way more agile than people even typically think of agile. But it's just a point of about less process actually giving you more in the long run. And I'm just a big fan of it. So the next point, Slack. I think I spoke earlier about how I asked if you guys use Slack. And I think everybody's familiar with it. Some of you guys use it in practice. This is a Slack group or Slack team set up specific for this talk. And as I've been talking this morning and moving those cards through the list, I'm automatically getting notifications into the Slack account, the Slack channel that has the integration tied to it, and keeping, if you were not listening to the talk and only seeing this channel, keeping that person up to date on what's going on. So as a project manager, you have 10 people on a team, it's almost impossible to know what the pace of things are and what is exactly getting done. We use things like stand-ups and estimating points to do that, but nothing's better than, hey, stand-ups, it's done. So this is about all these cards with a red label are about integrations and how you can interweave some of these ideas and systems into your current organization. So Slack Apps is a brand new platform just released. Think of the way that apps are for a graphical interface, so like apps on an iPhone, bots for a messaging platform. So conversational input and output would be the equivalent of logging into a system and doing some kind of CRUD function. Well, I'll show you this first. So that's just Trello coming into Slack. Now, we actually don't use Trello at all because we are software developers. I use Trello as an example because it is the leanest and it's free for until you just go crazy with it. The leanest example of having Kanban or Trello board. A lot of people don't even know what Kanban is, but are still very familiar with Trello. So we use GitHub for everything, and if you went into GitHub as a software developer, you're used to seeing this setup. We have another add-on called ZenHub that a GitHub add-on called ZenHub that gives us a couple other concepts. A burn down chart, which we don't have any milestones in here, so we can't get that. And then this same set of boards. So you'll see it's exactly the same setup, and there's a reason why somebody has spent all this time building ZenHub, because they know it works. Obviously it doesn't work to load the web page, but it works. Regardless, we have the same setup like any other Trello card, but it's just more specific to software development. The labels bring in all of the traditional labels in software development, like won't fix, and then milestones, estimating points, and again, assigning somebody and having somebody be responsible for that issue and therefore contributing and having control. So if I take one quick example of adding that README that was so robust earlier, and this is just my card that I have assigned to me. So we won't pull down the repo and force you guys to watch the console. But I believe I can go through here. Yep. it out. So we'll commit these changes, and then we'll come back, verify that what we've done is there. We didn't talk much about validation or quality assurance, but that's pretty unique to every organization as well. Regardless, we see that it's there, give that the thumbs up, come over to my boards, and then I'm gonna just move it straight from the backlog, though I should have put it in current as I was working on it, go straight from the backlog into closed. If we come back to our Slack account, just like with the Trello updates, we can send those updates from GitHub into our Slack account. The very last thing in terms of integration that we have is Envision. So Envision is a prototyping tool that I believe in a lot, and we refuse to build software until we have a working prototype. There's just too much margin for error if we can't see it and have it as a clickable application. Envision allows you to download, let's see if I can pull up a good one, maybe. Envision allows you to download this app and then use it as if though it was a real app. It's a series of screens that have hotspots, I think is what they call them. Yeah, hotspots. And to not get too far in the weeds, these hotspots are clickable. And then we have, a sticky nav bar. This is scrollable. This hamburger menu drops down. And when you have a user story and you have defined all of the dependencies or the other features that may have or may be affected by an issue, as well as screenshots and a prototype, you really couldn't ask for more as a developer. You're kind of taking away all of the gray. So let me think about what I was going to do here. All right, so here's all of the screens for this prototype. Notice a few other items up here. It can be sometimes difficult to get the mock-ups or the comps from design over to a development team. One way to do this is to put the actual source file on Envision, and then it will programmatically cut out all of those screens, and then as the designer is making edits to that same file, it will automatically update the Envision prototype, which is a really great flow. Point here though is, again, we see the idea of Kanban being applied in design. And we can move these tasks around. Let's go to screens. And let's say we're gonna make a comment on one. So this might be a scenario where you're getting validation or client feedback. This login needs Google. And so, like with all the other systems, we can get those same updates in real time back into our Slack.
One other question to you, going back to the Einstein quote, how much time do you spend on Envision and the product design before pushing it into the development cycle?
So for an MVP application, it mainly breaks down to a third of the time. When you have a full live production app, it's probably going to go up because you're going to have just a lot more people giving their input, and they can rally around a drawing versus hard code, right?
Does that break down to then to one project or product manager for every 2 or 3 developers, or?
Does the prototype break down? Say that again. Sorry.
Well, I mean, if you're producing, if you're saying 1/3 of the time is spent on design, does that also break down to one or product or project or design person for every 2 or 3 developers?
Yeah, so we've been lucky enough to work with design firms outside of our team. So it's just been a service that's umbrellaed under what the client is already doing, maybe like a marketing team or something like that. So it's not something we manage a lot. It's just our issue has always been get me the comps, and usually they want to share them in like Google Drive, and then they want to say, oh, sorry, I sent you version 2.1 instead of 2.2, let me update that. And this just makes their life easier, makes our life a lot easier. But in terms of how many people project manager assigned to the design team, I probably don't have a good answer for it. Let me see our time. Okay. And I'm going over all these concepts at a pretty high level, but I'm gonna pull in, we got a couple minutes, Zapier. So if you're familiar with if this and that, or how APIs work and how you can trigger actions between systems, Zapier is a great option here where you can build commands from Slack. So think of Slack, specifically Slack bot, as an app in the same way that an app is on an iPhone, but it just works in a conversational pattern or a natural language pattern. You don't have to be Google to do this, right? Google is really great at natural language processing. You can do something as simple as a slash command. So if I said slash, or if I type in slash, I get this whole litany of things that I can do to trigger actions within the system. What is cool here, or at least what I think is cool, is that you can also create, or you can do anything really that you can come up with, but one example would be to create a slash command to do a GitHub issue straight from Slack. And that's pretty simple to set up, and you don't really need any coding experience or know how to write JavaScript or anything like that. The idea here is that everybody on the team's lives are as simple as possible, and they don't have multiple systems to go in and log out of. Most developers already have a ton of tools that they have to keep credentials with, and this is just one simple way of being able to do all this from one interface. Theoretically, you could live, other than building your project, you could live entirely in Slack if you built all of those systems behind it. One other example might be something like list, which it might be a slash. Yeah, so say list and be like, I just want to see what I'm working on today. So every time I type in slash list, I get that. I can't think of any better example at the moment, but the idea there is just to show you.
So is Zapier like a plugin for
Let me pull it up real quick. Zapier is actually so Zapier is a way to connect a bunch of different apps together. There's another tool this is probably more of like a business focused tool.
Yeah.
There's another tool called If This and That.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. I wasn't sure.
Same exact concept.
Gotcha, okay.
Same exact concept. Right, so share new tweets from a Twitter list in Slack.
Very
And I think If This and That has recipes. Is that?
cool. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Zapier has Zaps.
Yeah.
So that's the comparison. Save a little bit of time for questions, but I did want to show you this one point, so you guys don't think I'm crazy. Alright, I have it open. But this is the development team at Trello using a Trello board and also making it public so that they can get, actually on this one I don't think that they can capture user feedback, but they are able to show their users features as they're coming down the pipeline. And they also use the same exact flow in their development process. You can go in here if you wanted to and upvote once it populates. You can upvote a feature just like you could with something like Zendesk and do a feature request. But I just wanted to show that real quick as an example of a real world team that has thousands and thousands of users and a pretty complex application using this same methodology. So that's kind of the cap there, a final example. And I think we have a few minutes for questions if we wanted to.
Yeah, I'm curious, how does your system of the boards tie in or interface with your system for performance reviews? Like, are there indicators that feed directly to the unloved manager to do those?
Yeah, so I probably sound more pessimistic than I really am about the manager. So if we have a series of Google Sheets actually that do calculations on the fly. So let's say that your estimation, so I should say it like this. My thought is that the role of a manager at large can be, you can take out the human element and make it programmatic. And so we use Google Sheets to do that. And so if one of them is if you're not meeting your estimation points, we would have a conversation or a review.
So that would be one example.
Or if you were consistently having to be swarmed.
Okay. That would be another.
Yeah, because we would flag that issue with a label as swarm, which would then trigger a mark in your Google Sheet.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So you guys work in Kanban, but I'm a little bit, I'm confused about how that works with sprints. So you don't have sprint planning meetings where you choose how many issues from the backlog your whole team is gonna do? You're just continuously pulling?
So we have 2 internal projects that is without sprints and it's continuous, but we've tried to do that with clients and they don't really care for that concept too much. So when it's a client project, we have sprint meetings, we have retrospectives, we have the whole traditional work around putting a sprint together and finishing a sprint. What we do is we use these labels and mark a sprint, sprint 1, sprint 2, sprint 3, sprint 4.
Okay.
And then everything with that label would be tied to that sprint. Another way to do it obviously within GitHub is to use the milestones feature. Or you can create an epic now. I forgot about that. Let's go here. You can now create epics right here in ZenHub. So that's how we do it.
I have a question about estimating points.
Mhm.
One thing I've always found is that developers always understand the complexity aspect of it. Like when you said it was easy, medium, simple, hard. But the management side of things I found doesn't always understand that complexity component to it.
Right.
What they understand is the time component to it. So they see something as a 4, I think you called it, and that should take the most amount of time.
Right.
But a developer
2 to 3
may
days.
accomplish that in a half a day.
Right.
So I'm curious how you balance the expectations from both sides.
So, well, 2 examples kind of come in my head of like, well, a bunch of examples, but a lot of scenarios where we hit all those marks, and then a lot of scenarios where, hey, you said it was 2 to 3 days and it took 4 to 5 days.
Mhm.
And that sensation, I think, leaves people a little bit ticked off. So my job is just to manage those expectations, and I just do it in probably the least programmatic way possible and just a completely human way. And just say, hey, we didn't hit that, but why we didn't hit that is because X, Y, and Z, and we're gonna try to make up for that on this next sprint. And maybe a good time for that would be at the end of a sprint, or when you do your retrospective and allow your developers to give feedback, because they're probably even gonna trump what you say and let you know that, or let the client know, everybody involved know, that the reason why I didn't hit the timeline that I estimated is because you didn't tell me those 4 other things that you added mid-sprint. Or I had never got into Keen.io, but I thought it was simple, I got halfway through it. I learned a lot, so next time we do the Keen.io integration, it's gonna be twice as fast. That's probably the most, so there's I can't think of exactly what the guy's name is, but there's a lot of conversation, or a lot of stuff that's been written by a guy at GitHub about managing those expectations and what's the best way to do it. And I think at the end of the day, it's just a matter of being a human, right? And not using any process. So.
Okay. Well, sort of around that, do you guys have pointing meetings? And do you have any rules around pointing, when you get together to do points? Because we do, and often we get into the weeds. I think it's Cone that says you only have 3 minutes to point.
Right.
To point a story.
Right.
And everybody inevitably wants to start talking about the details of the ticket in order to point it. So I'm just kind of curious if you
So-
have strict time limits or.
So no time limits at all, and we've tried different scenarios like that. What I like to do is have all of the issues outlined in the backlog, and then let developers pick the issues if they're not overloaded. So I don't probably subscribe to a lot of the requirements around Scrum, but let them pick the ones that they feel most proficient in, and then give us their points, and then do the inverse of, you said this was 3 points, are we still on track? Chemo has a little bit more proficiency on analytics, maybe he would be a better fit there. No, Brian's right, it is 3 points, and go on to the next one. So we kind of have it more of like a self-serve model versus a meeting.
Okay.
But it bites us sometimes, so it's not necessarily a foolproof system.
All right, Brian. Brian would stick around for a couple of minutes. If you have any further questions, you can kind of hit him up. Next month, we're going to do, Michael Wright is going to present on serverless architecture using the Lambda platform, I guess, in AWS. So that'll be the third week of May. And then in June, we're going to basically do a panel discussion on HR, which is up to you guys. You know, three companies in town are going to come together and what's changing, how they're sourcing, and that kind of stuff. So we're going to go after the companies that are recruiting a little more aggressively now. Spark's going to basically fill about 60 positions. Boomtown, and we'll pick a third. I think it might be Blackbud. Peggy with Blackbud. So that's May and June coming up. The next one's going to be technical, and then we'll switch it up to a business topic. For you guys who may know or don't know, the Syntax Con, which is a little software conference, basically that's going to be May 6th and 7th. It's just syntaxcon.com. This is something Carl Phillips is doing. Good lineup of speakers. I think it's very reasonable. It's affordable. So just get on your radar if you don't already have it on there. And we're probably going to do, probably June, July, do a little code talks, which is something we've done. Brian's presented a 1 day, six to 8 topics. So they just want our topics basically, which will be right here. So it's limited to 25 people. 30 people, should I say. So good stuff. Just checking, best way to keep up with this is on social media. Kristen does a good job pushing out what's coming out. But so, for those of you guys at the race, video is going to be coming out on Monday. Pictures already out there. And, so we appreciate all you guys, came out. It was kind of fun, up at Riverfront Park, a new venue, and we're already setting the plan, 17, and some new things. So thanks for coming out. Thank you, Brian, for presenting.
Awesome.
And
Thanks, guys.
we'll see you guys next time.